There is a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house at night, the kind that has nothing to do with sound. The television is off. The dishwasher has finished its cycle. The grandchildren are asleep down the hall, tucked in with the blankets I bought, using the nightlights I chose, dreaming in rooms I painted with my own hands 12 years ago when this house was still mine in every sense of the word. I know that quiet. I grew up in it. I raised my children in it. I buried my husband inside it. But the quiet I am describing now, the quiet I discovered on a Tuesday evening in late October, is a different animal entirely. It is the quiet of a woman who has just heard something she was never meant to hear, and who has made an immediate, calm, and absolute decision not to let anyone in that house know she heard it at all. My name is Eleanor Marsh. I am 71 years old. I have been a widow for 9 years. I have one son, Thomas, whom I carried for 8 months and 3 days, whom I taught to read using library books borrowed from a branch that has since been demolished, whom I watched graduate and marry and become a father, and I have 2 grandchildren, Cora and James, who are the best things that have come from any decision I have ever made in my life. I also have a daughter-in-law. Her name is Renata. And on a Tuesday evening in late October, while I was coming down the hallway from the bathroom, moving quietly as older women do in houses where other people have gone to sleep, I heard Renata's voice carrying through the partially open door of the kitchen. She was on the phone. Her voice was low but not low enough. Houses remember the people who built them. The acoustics in this hallway are particular. My husband Raymond designed this house, and he designed it for listening, for parents who needed to hear a child cough in the night, for a family that moved through these rooms together, for a woman who has always paid attention. I stopped at the end of the hallway. I did not make a sound. And I heard my daughter-in-law say, in a voice that carried the brisk certainty of someone already past the decision stage, the words that would change everything. She goes to a home by spring. Tom is almost convinced. We just need to wait her out. I stood there for 3 full seconds. My hand rested lightly against the wall. The paint was the color I had chosen. A warm cream that Raymond said looked like the inside of a seashell. Then I walked back to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed. I did not cry. I want you to understand that. I am telling you this not to perform strength but because it is true, and because it matters for what I am about to tell you. I did not cry and I did not shake and I did not reach for my phone to call anyone. I sat on the edge of my bed in the house that I owned that Raymond and I built together, that is registered in my name alone because Raymond was precise about these things, because Raymond knew something about the world that some people never learn, and I folded my hands in my lap and I began to think. Not with panic. Not with grief. With clarity. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Linda's Life Diaries. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. For a family's world, let me tell you about Renata. Not the Renata that Thomas sees. The capable, efficient, organized woman who manages their household calendar and remembers every school concert and speaks in the particular warm register she uses when other people are watching. That Renata exists. I am not saying she is entirely a performance. I am saying she is only one of the versions available. The Renata I have come to know operates in the register of things not quite said, the observation delivered as a gentle concern, the suggestion framed as a question, the implication dropped like a stone into a still pond so that by the time the ripples reach you, the person who dropped it is already on the other side of the room discussing something else entirely. It began small. It always does. The first time Renata mentioned a senior community. That was the phrase she used, senior community, as though it were a lifestyle choice rather than a displacement. Thomas had been in the kitchen making coffee. I was at the table. Cora was 8, James was 5, and they were doing what young children do on Saturday mornings, which is exist loudly and without self-consciousness, and it was the kind of morning I had stored up like currency during Raymond's illness and spent freely in his absence. Renata had come in from somewhere, the garden I think, and she had sat across from me with a cup of herbal tea and said casually, looking out the window, I was reading about this beautiful community over in Hadley. Independent living. They have an arts program apparently. And the grounds are gorgeous. I had looked at her. She had looked at the window. Are you considering moving? I asked. She laughed. Oh no. I just thought, I don't know. For the future. For options. You know how it is. Thomas poured his coffee. He didn't turn around. I knew exactly how it was. That was 14 months ago. Since then, the subject has circled back with the patience of something that has decided it can afford to wait. Comes in different shapes. Sometimes it arrives as concern. Mom, you look tired at dinner. Are you sure the stairs aren't too much? Sometimes it arrives as practicality. It just makes sense to start thinking about these things before they become urgent, don't you think? Once, this was in August during a family dinner with Renata's sister visiting. It arrived as a story, one of those stories that is really not a story at all but a thesis delivered in narrative form, about a friend of a friend whose mother had fallen and hadn't been found for 6 hours because she lived alone, and how everyone had wished they had made different arrangements sooner. I had eaten my roasted chicken and listened and said nothing. Because here is what I understood, even before the Tuesday evening in October when I heard it stated plainly, the conversation was not actually about me. It was not about my well-being or my safety or the stairs or the arts program in Hadley. The conversation was about this house. About this address on Birchwood Lane, which sits on 3/4 of an acre in a part of town that has, in the last several years, become the kind of neighborhood where young families with professional incomes look with a specific hunger. Raymond and I bought this property in 1984. I know what it is worth now. Thomas knows what it is worth now. And Renata is a woman who has always understood real estate in the same intuitive way that certain people understand chess. Not as a game but as a language, and one she has been speaking since before she arrived in my family. Well, let me tell you about Thomas. My son is a good man. I want to be clear about this because the story I am telling you contains elements that could cause you to doubt it, and I do not want that. Thomas is a good man in the way that certain men are good, genuinely, at the level of his values, in the choices he makes when they are unambiguous. He is patient with his children. He is loyal to his friends. He remembers Raymond's birthday every year without being reminded, and he drives me to my cardiologist appointments even when it inconveniences him. And when I told him 6 years ago that I did not want to celebrate my 65th birthday, he arranged exactly what I had asked for, a quiet dinner, the 4 of us, with the lamb stew I make every Christmas. But Thomas is also a man who has been married to Renata for 11 years. And 11 years is long enough that the water has taken the shape of its container. He hears things the way she has taught him to hear them. He sees things the way her framing has made available to him. He is not malicious. He has simply, gradually permitted himself to be translated. I have watched it happen. I have watched the translation proceed over years the way water dissolves limestone, invisibly, incrementally, and then all at once. The Thomas who moved Renata into this house for their first 2 years of marriage is not the Thomas who now uses the phrase, making practical arrangements, in a tone that sounds borrowed. The Thomas who used to sit beside me on the porch and talk about Raymond is not the Thomas who last spring said, carefully looking at his hands, "Mom, Renata and I have just been talking about what makes the most sense long term. Not now. Just eventually." I had looked at my hands too. Then I had looked at him. "I appreciate that you think about the future," I said. He had nodded, relieved. He had not heard what I did not say. Are also the small things. The things that happen in kitchens and hallways and at dinner tables, the domestic choreography of a family in which one person has been gently, consistently repositioned. The chair at the far end of the dining table, that happened 18 months ago, so gradually I almost missed it. Raymond and I always sat at opposite heads. When Thomas and Renata moved in with the children following the renovation that never quite finished in their own house, a renovation that began as a 6-week project and is now, 3 years later, still, according to Renata, almost done, I naturally continued to sit at my end of the table. For a while we all did. Then one Sunday I came to the table and my seat was occupied by Renata's laptop bag, placed there with the casual authority of someone who does not expect to be questioned. There was a chair pulled from the wall, a side chair, not a dining chair, slightly lower, at the far end near the kitchen door. I sat in the side chair. No one mentioned it. I noted it. There was the Sunday 2 months ago when Renata rearranged the kitchen while I was at church. Not dramatically, she did not throw anything away, did not discard the things that belonged to me. She simply moved them, my colander to a high shelf, my good baking pans behind the roasting dishes, my handwritten recipe cards, which I keep in a tin my mother gave me, which has been on that kitchen counter since before Thomas was born, to the back of the pantry behind a box of pasta. I found the recipe tin on a Wednesday. I did not say anything. I moved it back to the counter, and I placed it there with the same calm with which one places a flag. By the following Sunday it was in the pantry again. I left it there that time. The thing about small things is that they accumulate. Each individual one is dismissible, forgettable even. But a woman who has managed the finances of a growing family, who has navigated grief and rebuilding and 27 years of mortgage payments without missing one, who has kept every receipt and every document and every piece of correspondence in a filing system Raymond would have recognized as his own, that woman does not miss accumulations. She catalogs them. She keeps the catalog somewhere they cannot reach. Understand the children. Let me tell you about Cora and James because they are the part of this story that complicates everything the way real things always do. The part that makes it impossible to simply be angry, or simply be strategic, or simply be anything at all except a grandmother. Cora's 12 now. She has Raymond's eyes. That particular shade of gray that is not gray at all but the color of the sky just before a storm decides what it wants to do. She is quiet in the way that observant children are quiet, the kind of quiet that is not shyness but attention. And she watches the adults in this house the way I watched adults when I was 12, which is to say, she sees more than she is supposed to, and she has learned not to say so. 2 weeks before the Tuesday in October when I heard Renata on the phone, Cora had come to my room in the evening. She knocked twice, which is her way, and I said come in, and she sat on the edge of my armchair with the particular arrangement of her limbs that means she has something to say but is not yet sure how. "Grandma," she said. "Yes. Are you happy here?" I had looked at her for a moment. I had not asked why she was asking because I knew why she was asking, and asking why would have put her in the position of reporting on her parents, which is a position I will not place my grandchildren in. "This is my home," I said. "This is where your grandfather and I built our life. Yes, I am happy here." She had nodded slowly. Then she had said, in the voice of someone delivering information that has cost her something to carry, "I heard Mom and Aunt Patricia talking. About things." "I know," I said. "Are you going to do anything?" I had looked at her, at Raymond's eyes, at the particular careful intelligence of her face, and I had said the truest thing I knew. "I am going to take care of it." She had nodded. She had believed me. That is not a thing I take lightly. Violent observation after the Tuesday evening in October, I made a decision that took me less than an hour to arrive at, sitting on the edge of my bed with my hands folded in my lap. I was not going to confront anyone. I was not going to cry, and I was not going to accuse, and I was not going to sit Thomas down for the kind of conversation that he would report to Renata within the hour and that would cause them to accelerate whatever timeline they had agreed on. I was not going to write letters or call my own attorney in a panic, or do any of the things that a woman in a less advantageous position might do out of fear. Because here was the thing that Renata did not know, that Thomas had apparently forgotten or perhaps never fully understood, that I had kept to myself for the 9 years since Raymond's death with the same deliberate privacy with which Raymond had always advised me to keep it. I am not, and have never been, the dependent in this house. Raymond was an electrical engineer for 31 years. He was precise, methodical, and constitutionally incapable of leaving a financial loose end. When he died, he left behind not a complicated estate but a very simple one, constructed with the same clean logic he applied to everything. The house in my name, the savings in my name, the investment accounts in my name. 3 properties, the house on Birchwood Lane, a lake property 4 hours north that I have never sold because I cannot bring myself to, and a commercial property on the edge of town that Raymond bought in 1998 as a hedge against retirement, which now houses 4 small businesses and generates a monthly income that would surprise most people who know me. Not because I have hidden it. But because I do not discuss money. I never have. Raymond didn't. Our accountant knows. My attorney, a woman named Gillian Park, who has handled our affairs for 22 years, and who has the particular manner of someone who considers discretion a professional value rather than a preference, knows. Thomas does not know the specifics. He knows his father was careful. He knows the house is mine. Beyond that, I have never felt it necessary to provide an accounting of what I have and what I hold, because my finances are mine, and I am 71 years old, and I have earned the right to keep my own counsel. This had always been the right decision. Now it was the essential one. Understand the morning after the Tuesday evening, I woke at 5:30, which is my usual time. I made coffee in the kitchen before anyone else was awake. I always have. I have done it for 50 years, and I will do it for as long as my legs carry me down these stairs. I sat at the kitchen table in the early dark, in the chair that is not the good dining chair, and I drank my coffee, and I thought about what I had heard and what it meant and what I was going to do about it. I thought about Violet. There is a woman I know only from the story she eventually told. A woman who had been watched and managed and gently maneuvered, and who had watched the watchers back from behind the careful screen of apparent vulnerability. I thought about what she said or what she might have said, about the specific power of being underestimated by people who need you to be manageable. They were waiting for me to become easy. The difference between my situation and the one I was thinking of is this. I had not fallen. I had not confused myself or appeared uncertain, or given any observable signal of decline. My mind is clear. My health is, according to my cardiologist, genuinely impressive for your age, Eleanor. I do not need to perform weakness because I am not weak. What I needed to do was something different. I needed to let them proceed. Because a plan revealed prematurely is not a plan, it is an objection. And an objection gives the other side time to adjust. What I needed was not for Renata to know that I knew. What I needed was for Renata to continue believing that the situation was proceeding on her timeline, toward her outcome, without complication. I needed to watch. And I needed to build. Understand. For over the next 6 weeks, I moved with the particular unhurried precision of someone who has all the time in the world, which I did. The first call I made was to Gillian Park. I made it from my car, parked in the lot outside the pharmacy on Whitmore Street, because houses have acoustics and I had learned to respect mine. Gillian answered on the second ring. Eleanor, she said. There was something in her voice, not surprise exactly but recognition, as though she had been expecting this call for some time. I need to review some things, I said, quietly. When can you come in? Tomorrow afternoon. I can be there at 2. I'll clear it. That is the kind of attorney you want when you are building something quietly. Not one who asks why you are calling. One who clears her calendar and says nothing else until you are sitting across from her. I went to see Gillian the following afternoon on the pretext of a dental appointment. I told Thomas the first had a cleaning, which is the kind of errand so routine and so uninteresting that no one asks follow-up questions. I sat across from Gillian in her office, which smells of old paper and coffee and something permanent, and I told her what I had heard. She listened without expression. When I finished, she folded her hands on her desk, a gesture I recognized as Raymond's, as though precision attracts certain habits regardless of the person, and she said, "Tell me what you want to happen." "I want the house protected," I said. "I want everything reviewed. I want nothing in a position to be challenged." "Is Thomas on any of the accounts?" "No." "Is he listed on anything that gives him access or authority?" I thought about it. "The emergency medical form. That's standard. We may want to address that." "Yes." She wrote something down. Then she looked up. "Eleanor, I want to ask you directly. Are you concerned about your son specifically, or about his wife?" I considered the question with the care it deserved. "I think my son has been managed into a position," I said. "I think the architect of the position is his wife. I think that if she were not in the picture, my son would not be having these conversations. But he is having them." "He is." Gillian wrote something else. "All right. I'll have a full review done. I want to look at the Birchwood title, the lake property, and the commercial building. I'll also want to look at anything that could be argued as a resulting trust or family contribution claim, given they've been living there. I had not thought about that. Can that happen? Probably not, given the clear title history and Raymond's estate structure. But I want to make sure there are no gaps. Close them if there are. She nodded. I'll have something for you in 2 weeks. I thanked her and drove home and told Thomas the cleaning had gone well. During those 6 weeks I watched with the specific attention of someone who has all the relevant information and is simply collecting confirmation, and confirmation came readily, in the way it always does once you know what you are looking for. I watched Renata on her phone, the particular quality of her attention when she stepped outside, or to the far side of the garden, or to the car in the driveway on the pretext of getting something. I had not previously catalogued these departures. Now I did. They happened often, and they had a specific frequency that increased around the times when Thomas and I were alone together, as though they were time to allow Thomas time to plant seeds in my absence. I watched Thomas. This was harder. Watching your child, watching the adult your child has become, with the knowledge that he has been positioned against you, requires a kind of compartmentalization that I will not pretend was painless. But I had made my decision on the Tuesday evening when I sat on my bed, and the decision was clarity, not comfort. Thomas, I observed, had 2 modes in my presence now. The first was his ordinary mode, warm, present, the sun I raised. The second was the mode that Renata had engineered, and it had a specific texture. Slightly careful, slightly apologetic in advance, the mode of someone managing toward a conclusion he would prefer not to be responsible for. I could tell when the second mode had been activated because he would find a way to bring up the future, just gently, just in passing, the way Renata had taught him. The Hendersons moved their mother to that place in Glenmore. They say she loves it. I was reading that equity release can be a really good option, just financially speaking. The renovation might finally be done by spring. Wouldn't it be nice if we had more space here? I received these observations the way you receive weather. I noted them, I did not argue with them, and I stored what they told me. What they told me was that spring was the timeline. Renata had said it plainly on the Tuesday in October. She goes to a home by spring. Thomas was being moved toward a position from which he would deliver this conclusion to me as though it had been arrived at mutually, gradually, with everyone's best interests at heart. What no one in that house understood was that by spring, everything would already be decided. Not by them. I also watched for something I had not anticipated. The allies. In every situation of this kind, if you are patient and observant, you find them. The people who see what is happening and cannot quite bring themselves to be complicit in it, even if they cannot bring themselves to resist it openly. They signal themselves in small ways. A pause before agreeing, a look that holds a beat too long, a refusal to participate in a specific comment that the group expects them to ratify. In this house there were 2. The first was Cora. Cora had already showed me what she was. In the evening she came to my room and asked whether I was happy. She was 12 and she was watching, and she had her grandfather's eyes. I was careful with her. I never asked her to report on her parents, and I never would. But in the weeks after October, she began to visit my room more frequently, and the visits had a quality of vigil about them, as though she were keeping watch or keeping company, or doing both simultaneously in the way that children who understand more than they are supposed to sometimes do. She would bring homework. She would sit in the armchair and do her homework while I read, and we would exist in the same room in the comfortable silence of people who do not need to fill every space with speech. Once in November she looked up from her history book and said, "Grandma, is this house going to be okay?" The question was larger than it appeared. I knew that. "This house has been okay for 40 years, I said. "It will continue to be okay." She went back to her book. But she came back the next evening and the one after that. The second ally arrived unexpectedly. His name is Douglas Faraday. He is 73 years old and he lives 2 houses down, and he has been my neighbor for 16 years, and I have always known him the way you know a reliable landmark, consistently, without particular depth. He is a retired structural engineer who spends his mornings in his workshop, and his afternoons walking his retriever along the path that passes behind both our properties. In November, we fell into conversation over the back fence in the way that neighbors sometimes do, and Douglas said something that I still carry with me, not because it was exceptional but because it arrived at exactly the right moment. He said, "Eleanor, you know what Raymond always said about that property?" He said, "This house will outlast every complication because I built it right." I've always thought that was about more than the structure. I looked at him. "How long have you known?" I asked. Douglas was quiet for a moment. "Long enough to be glad you're still here," he said. That was all. But it was enough to know that I was not invisible in the way that Renata believed I was. I was being seen. Just not by the people who thought they were the ones doing the watching. In December, Jillian Park sent me a document package through a courier, addressed to me, marked personal. I brought it inside while Renata was at work and Thomas was at school pickup, and I sat at the kitchen table, in the side chair at the far end near the kitchen door, and I read every page. The house was clean. The title was in order, my name only, no complications. The commercial property was clean. The lake property had a minor boundary discrepancy that Jillian had already initiated a process to correct. There was also a memo from Jillian, handwritten, which she preferred for sensitive matters. No legitimate claim exists for any occupant of the Birchwood property. Your position is unambiguous. Let me know when you're ready for the next step. I folded the memo and placed it in my recipe tin. My recipe tin was on the kitchen counter, where I had placed it that morning, where Raymond would have recognized it, where it had always been. January. I knew enough. I knew the timeline, spring. I knew the mechanism, Thomas positioned as the responsible adult child raising a practical concern. I knew the goal, the house, the address, the equity that Renata had been calculating since before she sat across from me with that cup of herbal tea and looked out the window and said, casually, I was reading about this beautiful community. I knew the allies, Cora, who was watching, Douglas, who was present, and Jillian, who was building. What I did not yet know was the specific moment, the event, the meeting, the conversation in which the plan would become visible. The moment when someone would put a brochure in front of me, or sit across from me with the particular arrangement of their hands that means we need to talk, or say something that was meant to seem reasonable and inevitable, but was in fact a decision that had already been made without me. I did not need to know it in advance. I only needed to be ready when it arrived. And I was. But first there was something else. Something I had not planned for, that arrived the way the things you have not planned for always arrive, through a child in the evening quietly. It was a Saturday in January. Cora had been in my room, doing her homework in the armchair while I read. It was late, later than her usual bedtime. I could hear Thomas and Renata's voices downstairs, low and continuous. The specific murmur of a conversation that does not want to be interrupted. Cora looked up from her book. She did not say anything at first. She just looked at me, and she had an expression that I recognized from her grandfather's face, from 40 years of his face, the expression of someone who has decided the cost of not speaking is greater than the cost of speaking. They have a meeting, she said. A meeting. With a man from a company. A real estate company. About the house. She said it steadily, without drama, the way she delivered all information she had decided was necessary. I heard Mom on the phone. She said February. I looked at her. You did the right thing by telling me, I said. Are you going to be okay? I looked at my granddaughter, at the particular intelligent gray of her eyes, at the 12-year-old girl who had been watching the adults in her house with the careful attention of someone who understands more than she is supposed to, and I said the thing I needed her to hear, and the thing that also happened to be completely true. Cora, I said. I have been waiting for exactly this. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once, went back to her book, and stayed in my room until 11 o'clock, reading, while her parents murmured in the kitchen below. She goes to a home by spring. February was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks was more than enough. I had been waiting since October. I had been building since October. And now I knew the date, and I knew the shape of it, and the only thing left to do was let the meeting happen. Let them believe the plan was proceeding. Let them sit in my kitchen with their real estate man and whatever comfortable language they had prepared. Let them arrive at what they believed was the end of a thing. Because what none of them understood, not Renata, not the real estate man she had called in February, not even Thomas, who was a good man being led toward an action he had not fully reckoned with, was that the meeting would not be the end of the plan. It would be the beginning of mine. Understood. I sat in my room that January night, after Cora had gone to bed, and I looked at the walls that Raymond painted, and the floor he laid, and the window that looks out over the property he built, and I thought about the 40 years of Tuesday mornings that had happened in this house before anyone thought to reassign me to a side chair near the kitchen door. I thought about the recipe tin on the counter and what it meant and why I kept putting it back. I thought about Jillian's handwritten memo, folded inside it. And then I picked up my phone and I sent Jillian one message. We are ready for the next step. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday. I know this because Cora told me, and I know it because Thomas told me, though the way Thomas told me was not the way you tell someone about a meeting that concerns them. It was the way you mention something peripheral, something administrative, something that exists at the edge of the story rather than at its center. Some people are coming by Saturday afternoon, he said. It was a Thursday evening in late January. We were in the kitchen. I was making tea. He was standing near the counter with that particular quality of preemptive apology that I had come to recognize as Renata's architecture in his posture. What kind of people? I asked. Just a couple. Friends of Renata's, sort of. Acquaintances. I poured the boiling water over the tea. I did not look at him. That's nice, I said. He shifted. They might want to look at the house. Just to look. Renata thought it would be good to know what things are worth. For planning purposes. Picked up my cup. I said. Mom. Thomas. He stopped. He looked at me, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw him clearly, the way you can sometimes see a person through the architecture of what has been built around them. He was uncertain. He was uncomfortable. He was a man who had agreed to something in increments and was now standing at the accumulated weight of those increments and finding it heavier than anticipated. Is that okay? He asked. I looked at him with the full warmth I had for him, which was genuine and substantial and in no way diminished by what I knew. Of course, I said. I'll make sure the house is tidy. He looked relieved in a way that told me everything about how he had expected that conversation to go. I carried my tea to my room. I called Jillian Park from my car the following morning. Understood. Here's what Jillian and I had built over the preceding 3 months. Assembled quietly in afternoon meetings and phone calls made from parking lots and one long session at her office on a Wednesday when Renata was at her book club and Thomas was at a conference and I had 4 unobserved hours in which to be completely myself. The house at Birchwood Lane had been reviewed, its title confirmed clean, and Jillian had prepared what she called a declaration of intent. A notarized document stating my explicit intention to remain in residence, my full legal competency, and my instructions regarding any future decisions about the property, signed by me and by 2 witnesses who were not family members. It is the kind of document that exists to make certain conversations very difficult to have without my participation. The commercial property had been transferred into a small holding company. My holding company, established quietly in November, named for Raymond's initials in the way that a private joke can also be a shield. The transfer was legal, clean, and final. The income from the commercial property now flowed through that company into an account that bore no relationship to any account Thomas had ever been aware of. The lake property remained as it was in my name untouched. And there was one more thing. The thing I had spent the longest time deciding. The thing I had gone back and forth on in the evenings after Cora went to her room and the house settled into its nighttime quiet. The thing that was not about protection but about what came after protection. I had revised my will. The original will, drafted with Raymond and updated after his death, left the house to Thomas with a life estate for me, meaning I could live there until my death, after which it would pass to him. It was a reasonable document for the time it was written. It assumed a particular set of circumstances, a particular configuration of relationships, a particular Thomas who had not yet been translated into someone else. The new will left the house to Thomas and Cora jointly, with a life estate for me, and with a specific clause, drafted by Jillian and reviewed 3 times, that required mutual consent for any sale during my lifetime, meaning that Renata, who was not named in the document, could not engineer a sale without Cora's agreement. Cora, who was 12. Cora, who was watching. Cora, who had come to my room on a January night and told me about a real estate meeting in February because she understood, with the particular intelligence of her grandfather's eyes, that the cost of not speaking was greater than the cost of speaking. When I told Jillian about this clause, she had looked at me for a moment. "That's elegant," she said. "Raymond taught me that good structures are elegant," I said. She signed the document. I signed the document. It was filed on a Tuesday in January, 3 days before Thomas stood in the kitchen and told me that some people were coming Saturday. The Saturday arrived with the particular indifference of a late January day, gray, cold, the kind of sky that has no interest in the human events occurring beneath it. I was up at 5:30 as usual. I made my coffee. I sat at the kitchen table in the side chair and I drank it in the early dark, and I thought about Raymond, and about the 40 years of Saturday mornings in this kitchen, and about how this particular Saturday was going to go. Renata came downstairs at 8. She was in the mode I thought of as her management mode, efficient, pleasant, slightly elevated in energy, the mode she used when she was organizing something toward a conclusion. She made a show of tidying the kitchen, which was already tidy, and she said without looking at me, "Eleanor, the people coming today, I just want to give you a heads up, they may want to walk through the upstairs as well, just to get a full picture." "Of course," I said. She looked at me then, a brief assessing look, the kind you give to a variable you are trying to estimate. "You're welcome to join us if you like," she said. The offer was perfunctory. She did not expect me to accept it. "Thank you," I said. "I'll be in my room." She nodded and went back to her tidying. She did not hear what I did not say. They arrived at 2 o'clock. I heard them from upstairs, the sound of the door, voices in the entry, the specific timbre of professional warmth that real estate agents deploy in unfamiliar houses. There were 2 of them, a man and a woman, and from the brief view I had from the top of the stairs before I returned to my room, they were what I had expected. Well-dressed, equipped with the practiced ease of people who spend their working lives making transactions seem inevitable. I closed my door. I sat in my chair by the window, the good chair, the one I had moved from the corner when I first understood what was happening, the one I had placed to face the door, and I listened to the sounds of the house being assessed. Footsteps on the stairs. Doors opening. The murmur of professional observation. "This is nice light, these ceilings are good, the bones are excellent," the kind of language designed to make a building feel like a commodity while also making the commodity feel desirable. They came to my door. There was a pause. Then Renata's voice low. "That's my mother-in-law's room. We don't need to go in." "Does she?" The woman's voice professional and careful. "She's fine," Renata said. "She won't be here long-term. We're sorting that out." I sat in my chair. I had my hands folded in my lap. I looked at the window, at the January light on the back garden, at the 3/4 of an acre that Raymond and I had spent 40 years into. "She won't be here long-term. We're sorting that out," said through my own door. In my own house. In the voice of someone who considers the matter already decided. Thought, there it is. That is the line. Not the overheard phone call in October, which was the beginning of knowing. Not the side chair or the recipe tin, or the polite mentions of senior communities with gorgeous grounds. This was the line. Said through a closed door in a house that is mine. About a future that she has already narrated without me. I unfolded my hands. I picked up my phone. I sent Jillian a text that said 3 words. This weekend. Monday. If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Linda's Life Diaries. The best ones are still coming, and the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. Rising tension after they left. The real estate agents, with their brochures and their assessments and their professional warmth, there was a particular quality to the house. The kind of quality that follows a decision being made in one room without the knowledge of the person most affected by it. Dinner that evening was ordinary on the surface. Thomas made pasta, which he does on Saturdays when he wants to seem domestic and untroubled, and Renata poured wine, and the children ate at the counter because it was Saturday, and Saturday is apparently not a formal dinner night, which is a shift that happened somewhere in the past 3 years without discussion. I sat at my end of the table, the side chair end, the kitchen door end. I ate the pasta and I talked to James about his science project. He is building a model of the solar system from household materials, which is an assignment I find unexpectedly moving, and I listened to Renata talk about a podcast she had been listening to, and I watched Thomas, who did not quite meet my eyes at dinner, who had the quality of a man who has done something he cannot fully account for, and is hoping the distance between the action and its consequences will be wide enough to walk. It will not be. The pasta is good, I said. Thanks, Mom, Thomas said. That was the extent of it. After dinner I helped clear the table. I always do, I have always done it, and I will do it for as long as I am standing in this kitchen. And Renata said with a kind of careful warmth, Eleanor, you don't have to. I know, I said, and kept clearing. She watched me for a moment with that assessing look. Something had shifted slightly in her manner since the afternoon. Not worry exactly, but a recalibration. As though she had expected a different texture from the day, and was revising her model of me in some small way. I gave her nothing to revise with. I stacked the dishes, I rinsed the pan, I said goodnight to James and kissed the top of his head, and I went upstairs. I did not sleep for some time, but when I did I slept well. The following week had a specific quality that I have thought about since. It was the quality of a room in which something has been placed on a timer. You cannot hear the ticking but you know it is there. And the people who set the timer are beginning to develop a certain restlessness, a certain readiness to move, the readiness of people who believe the outcome is assured and are simply waiting for the mechanical completion of the process. Renata's manner toward me in that week was notably warmer. Not warm in the genuine sense, I am 71 years old and I have known the difference between the two for 60 of those years, but warm in the sense of someone who is managing toward a conversation they want to go smoothly. She brought me tea on Tuesday morning without being asked. She asked about my cardiologist appointment in a voice that suggested she was genuinely interested in the answer. On Thursday she sat across from me while I was reading and said, in a voice carefully calibrated for gentleness, Eleanor, I just want you to know whatever we decide, it's about what's best for everyone. Including you. Especially you. I put down my book. I looked at her. That's very kind, Renata, I said. I just want you to feel included in the conversation. I appreciate that, I said. I picked my book back up. She sat there for a moment, just a moment, and I could feel her assessing the temperature of the room, trying to find the edge of what I knew or suspected, trying to determine whether the warmth was landing the way she had intended it. Then she stood up and said something about needing to start dinner, and went to the kitchen. I turned a page. Thomas came to me on Friday. This was different from Renata's approach, less managed, more uncomfortable, the approach of someone who has been sent on an errand he does not entirely believe in. He sat on the edge of the chair across from me in the sitting room and he said, Mom, I wanted to talk to you. About the future. About practical things. All right, I said. He looked at his hands. Renata and I have been talking a lot. About what makes sense for all of us. The houses, it's a lot to maintain. And we want to make sure you're... Tom, I said. He stopped. I looked at him with full attention. Not the management of attention, not the performance of it, but the real thing, the undiluted maternal attention of a woman who has known this person since before he had words. I love you, I said. I want you to know that before I say anything else. I love you, and I know you are a good man. And I know this is not entirely your own thinking. His face changed. Mom, I'm not angry, I said. I'm not upset. I want you to hear that clearly. I just want you to know that I see what is happening, and I am taking care of it, and nothing will happen to this house that I do not choose. He looked at me for a long moment. What does that mean? He said. It means what it says. He was quiet. Then, have you talked to someone? A lawyer. I talk to Jillian regularly. I always have. Mom. His voice had something in it. Not quite alarm, not quite relief, but something between the two. Is everything okay? With the will, everything is exactly as I intend it to be, I said. And I intend for it to stay that way. He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, and his voice was quieter than the conversation that had preceded it, and carried in it something that sounded more like himself than anything he had said to me in months. I didn't mean for it to go like this. I know, I said. She makes a lot of sense when she talks about it. She does, I said. She's very good at that. He was quiet again. Outside, James was shouting something in the garden, something about the solar system, about how far away Saturn was. What are you going to do? Thomas asked. I'm going to take care of it, I said. That's what I've always done. He looked at me. And I saw it, the moment when the translation begins to slip, when the man who has been managed into a position starts to feel the architecture of that position and recognize it as something other than his own construction. It was not a complete reversal. It was not a declaration or a confrontation or a confession. It was simply a moment of seeing. Okay, he said. Okay, I said. He went back downstairs. I heard him and Renata talking in the kitchen later, too low to make out, but I knew the texture of it. I knew Thomas's voice when he is saying something Renata did not expect, the specific quality of resistance she would be encountering. I did not need to hear the words to understand the conversation. Something had shifted. It was not enough yet, but it was something. Understanding the Monday after the real estate visit, I drove to Jillian's office. The sky had cleared overnight. One of those bright winter mornings that arrive without warning and make everything look newly considered. I drove past the property on the edge of town, the commercial building Raymond had bought as a hedge. I drive past it occasionally, not out of sentiment but out of the particular pleasure of seeing something Raymond built in his careful, long-thinking way continuing to stand and function and matter. For businesses, a physiotherapy practice, a small accounting firm, a children's art studio, and a bakery that has been there for 11 years and that produces, according to Douglas Faraday, the best sourdough in the county. Raymond had bought that building from a man who thought he was getting a good deal. He was not. I parked outside Jillian's office. I sat in the car for a moment, in the bright cold morning, and I thought about what we were about to do. Jillian met me at the door rather than waiting for me to be brought in. A small gesture, the kind of small gesture that communicates regard without making a production of it. We sat across from each other in her office. The documents are ready, she said. All of them. All of them. She opened a folder. The declaration of intent is filed. The holding company transfer is complete. The will revision is registered. I also had one of my associates do a quiet review of any potential occupancy claims. There's nothing. The title is clean. The residency has always been yours. The improvements made during their tenancy don't meet the threshold for any kind of contribution argument. Good. Eleanor. She looked at me over her reading glasses. I want to ask you something directly. Go ahead. When this becomes visible, when they understand what has been done, how do you want to handle Thomas? I thought about it. About Friday, about the moment of seeing, about the man who had said I didn't mean for it to go like this in the voice that was more himself than anything else he had said in months. I want Thomas to have a path back, I said. I don't want to end my relationship with my son. I want to end a situation that was being imposed on me. Those are not the same thing. Jillian nodded slowly. And Renata? I want Renata to understand clearly and permanently that she was wrong about what she held power over. That will happen, Jillian said. The question is the setting. I've thought about the setting. She waited. I want it to happen in my house, I said. At my table. In my kitchen. I want to be sitting at the right end of the table when it happens. A small silence. All right, Jillian said. When? She mentioned February. I'd like to let February arrive. February is 3 weeks. 3 weeks is enough. I want to tell you about something that happened in those 3 weeks. Something I did not plan and did not engineer. Something that arrived the way the things that matter most always arrive, without announcement through ordinary life. It was a Wednesday evening and I was in the kitchen making soup, a chicken soup, the good kind, the kind that takes most of the day and fills the house with a smell that Raymond used to say was the smell of being home, and James came in from school. He was 8, and he had had the kind of day that 8-year-olds sometimes have, a day that had produced some social injury whose specifics were not immediately clear, and he came into the kitchen with the particular compressed face of a child managing the end of his composure. He sat at the kitchen counter. The children always sit at the counter, it's their place, the good high stools, the ones I bought before Cora was born. I kept stirring the soup. Bad day, I said. Kind of, he said. Do you want to talk about it? Not really. Okay. I stirred. He sat. The soup moved slowly in the pot. After a while he said, Grandma, are you going to live here forever? I stopped stirring. I looked at my grandson, at James, who had his mother's coloring and his father's expressions and something else besides, something that was entirely his own, a quality of directness that arrived without guile. That is a very interesting question, I said. Mom says you might not. She says there are places. James. I kept my voice perfectly level. I would like you to listen to me because what I am about to say is true, and I want you to remember it. He looked at me. This is my house, I said. Your grandfather built it. I own it. I will live in it for exactly as long as I choose, and no longer and not one day less. Okay. He looked at me for a moment with the particular solemnity of a child receiving a statement meant to last. Okay, he said. Good. I handed him a piece of bread because that is the other thing soup days are for. Now tell me about your day. He told me about his day. I stirred the soup. And I thought this is why. Not the will, not the documents, not the elegant legal structures that Jillian had assembled. Those were the armor. But the reason for the armor, the actual reason, was sitting at my counter eating bread and telling me about the injustices of the third-grade playground. It was Cora in my armchair with her history books and Raymond's eyes. It was this kitchen, this table, this soup, this house that Raymond built for listening. I was not fighting for property. I was fighting for the table at which my grandchildren would remember me. February arrived. The conversation, the one Thomas and Renata had been building toward, the one Renata had been narrating to her contacts and her sister and whoever was on the other end of those phone calls in the garden, arrived on a Saturday afternoon, which I had expected. Thomas came to find me in my room. He knocked, which he had always done, and I said come in, and he came in with the particular weight of a man who has arrived at something unavoidable. Renata was downstairs. I could hear her in the kitchen, moving with the slightly elevated energy of someone in management mode. Mom, Thomas said. Can we, Renata and I would like to talk. The four of us. Downstairs. Of course, I said. I stood up. I straightened my cardigan. I took one look around my room, at the window over the garden, at the walls Raymond painted, at the photograph on the nightstand of the two of us at the lake, the summer of 1989, the summer James was born, both of us laughing at something the photographer had said, and I felt with complete clarity the readiness of someone who has been preparing for exactly this moment since October. Lead the way, I said. We went downstairs. We went to the kitchen. And I sat down. Not in the side chair. Not at the far end near the kitchen door. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, Raymond's end, the right end, the end I had seated quietly and without announcement months ago and was now reclaiming with the same quiet and without announcement, and I sat down in it, and I folded my hands on the table, and I looked at my son and my daughter-in-law with the full, unhurried, unperformative attention of a woman who has been waiting for this conversation since October, and has been ready for it for considerably longer than that. Renata looked at the chair. Then she looked at me. Something crossed her face, so quickly that Thomas almost certainly did not catch it, but I did because I had been watching Renata for 3 years and I knew the full catalog of her expressions. It was not quite surprise. It was the expression of a variable that has behaved unexpectedly, the expression of a model encountering data that does not fit. She sat across from me. Thomas sat beside her. I waited. "Mom," Thomas began. "We just wanted to have a conversation about the house," I said. He stopped. Renata's hands, which had been flat on the table, shifted slightly. "Yes," Renata said, taking the conversation back with the smooth efficiency of someone who has prepared for this. "About the house and about the future, and about what makes the most sense for all of us going forward. We love you, Eleanor." "I know," I said. "And we want to make sure that whatever happens, it happens in a way that's good for everyone." "That's what I want too," I said. A pause. Renata looked at me. The assessment again, the variable estimating look. Something about my voice was not matching the model she had been running. "There are some beautiful options," she said. "We've been doing research. There's a community in Hadley." "Renata," I said. She stopped. "I'd like to say something," I said, "before we continue. Is that all right?" She looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at me. "Of course," he said. I looked at them both, at my son, who was a good man being carried by a current he had not entirely chosen, at my daughter-in-law, who was sitting across from me in my kitchen with a plan she had been building since before she sat with that cup of herbal tea and mentioned a beautiful community with gorgeous grounds, and I spoke. Not loudly. Not with drama. With the same quiet that I had maintained since October, since the hallway, since the moment I heard through the partially open door what was being decided about me without my participation. "I know about the real estate agents," I said. "I know about the meeting on the Saturday in January. I know about the phone calls. I know about spring." Renata's expression went through 3 changes in less than 2 seconds. I catalogued all 3. "I want to be clear," I continued, "about what is possible and what is not. This house is mine. It is in my name. It has been reviewed by my attorney. There is no mechanism by which it can be sold, transferred, or otherwise disposed of without my signature, which I will not give. The properties I own beyond this house are similarly protected. My financial situation is exactly what I require it to be, which means that the concern about my ability to maintain this house, which I know has been the framing for this conversation, is not a real concern. It is a framing." Silence. Complete, specific, heavy silence. Thomas had gone still. Renata had gone still. Outside, distantly, James was in the garden, still calculating something about the solar system. "I am not angry," I said. "I am telling you the shape of the situation as it actually exists, rather than as it has been presented to you, or to me, or to each other." Renata opened her mouth. "I'm not finished," I said. She closed it. "Thomas," I said. I looked at my son, and I let everything I felt for him be visible in that look. The love, the grief, the long patience of a mother watching a good man lose his footing. "I know this was not entirely your idea. I know you have been told things in a particular way over a long time, and that the framing has felt reasonable because she is intelligent and because you trust her. I am not asking you to stop trusting her. I am asking you to understand that I know what has happened, and that I am not a variable in someone else's plan. I am the woman who owns this house, who raised you in it, and who will decide what happens to it." Thomas looked like a man hearing an echo of himself from a direction he had not expected. "Mom, I love you," I said simply. "I love you too," he said. His voice was rougher than it had been. I turned back to Renata. Renata was not a woman who lost her composure easily. I had observed this over 11 years. She was precise and managed and capable of recovering quickly from unexpected information. But something about this moment was different from her model of it, and she was recalibrating in real time, and I could see the recalibration happening. "Eleanor," she said. Her voice was carefully controlled. "I hear what you're saying. But I want you to know that everything we've done has been out of genuine concern. I heard you through my door," I said. A pause that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "You said I wouldn't be here long term," I said. "You said you were sorting it out. You said it through my door in my house, to 2 people you had brought here to assess its value without my knowledge." Renata sat very still. "I am not asking you to explain it," I said. "I am telling you that I heard it, and that I have spent the past months ensuring that the plan that generated that statement cannot succeed. Not because I want to be in conflict with my son's family. Not because I have any interest in punishment. But because this is my home. And the people who built it with me deserve better than to have it treated as an asset to be managed. I looked at her. I am going to continue living here, I said. In this house, in this kitchen, at this table. I am going to make soup on Wednesdays and coffee before anyone else is awake on Saturdays. I am going to sit at this end of the table, which is where I have always sat. And the conversation about spring ends today. Another silence. Outside, James's voice, distant and unconcerned with all of this. Cora, did you know Saturn has 83 moons? Renata looked at Thomas. Thomas looked at his hands. Then he looked at me. And this time when I looked back at him, the translation had slipped enough that I could see his face. His actual face, the face underneath the 11 years of gradual repositioning. And what was on it was not guilt exactly and not relief exactly, but something that looked like the recognition of a person who has been found. Mom, he said. I'm sorry. I know, I said. I know you are. I looked at Renata. She was very still. There was a quality to her stillness that I recognized, not defeat, not surrender, but the particular stillness of a person arriving at the limits of a plan. A person who has understood that the variable they underestimated was in fact the fixed point, and that the entire architecture they built around it has to be reconsidered. She did not speak. I think, I said, that we should have dinner. I want to tell you what happened next. But I want to tell you first what did not happen. There was no shouting. No tears, not at the table. Thomas would cry later in a different room alone, and that was between him and his conscience and had nothing to do with me. No dramatic exits. No recriminations beyond the 2 or 3 sentences I have already told you about. Because the thing about a plan that has been built properly, built from structure rather than from anger, from preparation rather than from pain, is that when it arrives, it does not need noise. It is already done. The revelation is not a weapon. It is a fact. And facts, when they are solid and clean and have been verified by attorneys and registered with the appropriate offices, do not require emphasis. Renata helped make dinner. Quietly, with the contained efficiency she always brought to the kitchen. She cut vegetables. She set the table. She set it at the right end for me without being asked. I noticed that. I did not comment on it. But I noticed. That evening, after the children were in bed, I sat in my room for a long time before sleeping. I sat in the chair by the window, and I looked out at the garden in the February night, and I thought about Raymond. I thought about the afternoon and whether it had gone the way I had intended, and the answer was yes, and also more complicated than yes. Because intention and outcome are not the same thing. And a conversation that goes exactly as planned still leaves a residue. The residue in this case was the look on Thomas's face. Not the look at the table, which was recognition, which I could hold, but the look from earlier in the week, the Friday evening, when he had said I didn't mean for it to go like this. He had not. I believed that. I believed that my son, the good man I raised, had been moved so gradually toward a position that he had not fully understood the position until he was in it, and that standing in it he had not liked the view. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, the most important thing. Because there is a difference between a person who does something harmful and knows it is harmful and does it anyway, and a person who has been guided toward it so gradually that the harm became invisible until someone turned the light on. The first kind of person requires a different response than the second. Thomas was the second kind. Renata was something I had not yet fully decided about. She had been still at the table. She had helped with dinner. She had set my chair correctly. These were not large things, but they were not nothing either, and I had spent a long time understanding the difference between nothing and something. I had not resolved Renata. The conversation had not resolved Renata. The conversation had resolved the situation, the house, the spring deadline, the particular configuration of pressure and planning that had been aimed at me since that casual mention of a senior community with gorgeous grounds. Those were resolved. Jillian's documents were in place. The will revision was registered. The holding company existed. The situation was resolved. But Renata was a person, not a situation. And people are not resolved by documents. What happened with Renata, what happened with the family, with the specific arrangement of trust and damage and possible recovery that the afternoon had begun, that was still to be determined. What I knew, sitting by the window in the February dark, was this. I had said what was true. I had said it at the right end of my table. I had said it in the kitchen that Raymond designed for listening. And now it was known. All of it. And the next chapter of this story would be written not by plans but by choices. By the choices that Thomas and Renata made in the weeks and months that followed, in the particular brightness or shadow those choices would cast over the house on Birchwood Lane, over the children who grew up in it, over the grandmother at the right end of the table with the recipe tin on the counter. I could not control those choices. I had never tried to. What I had done, all I had done from October to February, from the hallway to the kitchen table, was make certain that when those choices were made, they would be made with full knowledge of what I was, and what I held and what I would not give up. That was enough. That was, as Raymond would have said, the right structure. I went to the window and looked out at the garden for a long time. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard settled. The house breathed the way houses do at night, the way houses do when they have been standing for 40 years and have learned to hold things. I put my hand on the glass. Cold and solid. Still here, I thought. Still here. The response the morning after the February conversation. I woke at 5:30. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, at the right end in the good chair, the dining chair, and I drank it in the early dark, and the house was quiet around me the way it had always been quiet on Saturday mornings, the particular deep quiet of a house that is still carrying the weight of the previous day and has not yet decided what to do with it. No one came downstairs for a long time. I did not mind. I had the coffee and I had the quiet and I had the knowledge that everything I needed to have in place was in place, and there is a specific peace available to a person in that position that I will not pretend is anything other than what it is. The peace of a woman who prepared, and who prepared correctly, and who has arrived at the morning after without losing anything essential. At 7:15 Cora came downstairs. She came in her school pajamas, the blue ones with the small printed stars, and she stopped in the kitchen doorway when she saw me sitting at the right end of the table, and she looked at me with Raymond's eyes, and something passed across her face that I recognized as relief, the specific and profound relief of a child who has been watching adults navigate something difficult and has been waiting, quietly and alone with the knowledge she was not supposed to have, to find out how it ended. "Morning," I said. "Morning, Grandma." She came and sat beside me, not at the counter but at the table, in the chair to my right, which is the chair that had always been Thomas's chair when the children were small and we ate breakfast together as a family. I poured her a small amount of coffee with a large amount of milk, which is what she has been allowed since she was 10, and which her mother does not entirely approve of but which I have quietly continued because it was what Raymond used to give Thomas on Saturday mornings when Thomas was 10, and because some traditions are worth maintaining without commentary. We sat together in the early dark. After a while Cora said, "Did it happen?" "Yes," I said. "Is it okay?" I thought about how to answer that, the full honest answer, the one that was true without being more than she needed to carry. "The house is okay," I said. "Everything I told you I would take care of is taken care of. Your grandmother is not going anywhere." She let out a breath. A long quiet breath, the kind that has been held for a while. "And Mom and Dad," she said. "That," I said, "is still being written." She nodded. She understood that. She was 12 and she was Raymond's granddaughter, and she understood the difference between a structure that is settled and a relationship that is in process. She drank her milky coffee. I drank mine. Outside, the February light was beginning to come up over the garden, thin and cold and honest, the kind of light that shows everything without flattery. "Grandma," she said. "Yes. I'm glad you're here." I looked at her. "Me too," I said. Thomas came downstairs at 8. He came into the kitchen with the specific quality of a man who has spent a night rearranging things, not the furniture of a room but the furniture of a version of himself, moving things back toward where they had been before someone gradually shifted them, finding in the process that some pieces are lighter than he remembered and some are heavier. He looked at me at the right end of the table. He looked at Cora beside me. He said nothing for a moment. Then he went to the counter and poured himself coffee, and he came and sat at the table, not across from me but around the corner in the chair adjacent, the chair that meant he was choosing proximity rather than position, which is a choice I noted without drawing attention to it. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I said. Cora excused herself, with the particular discretion of a 12-year-old who has been paying attention, and went upstairs. Thomas and I were left in the kitchen with the early morning and the coffee and the accumulated weight of 40 years and 11 and 1 night. "I've been up since 3, he said. "I know. I heard you." He turned his cup in his hands. "I've been thinking about a lot of things." That's usually what 3 in the morning is for. A small sound, almost a laugh, not quite. The sound of a man relearning the particular frequency of his mother's particular humor. "Mom." He stopped, then started again. "I need to say something properly. Not the way I said it yesterday at the table with, I need to say it when it's just us." "All right," I said. He looked at me, and his face had the quality I had seen the previous day at the table, the face underneath the 11 years, but clearer now without the shock of it. The way of view is clearer when the weather has settled. "I should have been paying better attention," he said. "To you. To what was happening. I think I knew it wasn't entirely right. Some of it. The chair. The way she talked about the future. I knew it wasn't right, and I told myself it was practical, and I kept telling myself that, and somewhere in all the telling I stopped checking whether it was true. I listened. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the chair. For the recipe tin. For the meeting I let happen in your house without telling you what it was. For spring. For letting that be a thing that was said. The chair. The recipe tin." He knew about the recipe tin, which meant he had always known about the recipe tin, and had not stopped it, which was its own kind of answer about the gradations of knowing and not acting that had characterized this past year. But he was here now, at 7:30 in the morning in the adjacent chair, with the face underneath the years. "I hear you," I said. "I mean it. I know you do." He was quiet for a moment. "What happens now?" I looked at my son, at the 51-year-old man who had once been the baby I carried for 8 months and 3 days, and who had once learned to read with library books, and who had once graduated and married and become a father, and who was now sitting in the adjacent chair at 7:30 in the morning asking what happens now. "Now," I said, "you and Renata figure out what you want your marriage to be. That is not my territory, and it never has been. What I can tell you is what my territory is." "The house," he said. "The house. This kitchen. This table. The end of this table. The recipe tin on this counter." I paused. "And you. You are my son. That is also my territory. Which means I am not going to let what happened this year be the last chapter of what we are to each other, because the chapter that it would end is one I have no intention of ending." He looked at me. His eyes were wet. He was 51 years old, and his eyes were wet, and I thought of the boy who had cried at Raymond's funeral with the particular contained devastation of a man who had learned that crying was not weakness but had not yet had enough practice with grief to know how to carry it. "Okay," he said. "Okay," I said. He reached across the corner of the table and put his hand over mine for a moment, the gesture of a son, not a managed adult child, not a variable in someone else's plan but a son, and then he withdrew it and drank his coffee, and we sat together in the early morning light until the house began to wake around us. Renata came downstairs last. She came at 9, dressed and composed in the manner she always was, and she came into the kitchen, and there was a moment, a brief moment, no longer than a breath, when she assessed the room and found it configured in a way that did not match the configuration she had been running in her models of this house. Thomas at the adjacent chair. Me at the right end. The recipe tin on the counter, which I had placed there that morning with the same quiet deliberateness with which I had been placing it there for months, the quiet deliberateness of a flag. She poured her tea. She came to the table. She sat across from Thomas, which put her to my left, which put her at the table without positioning. Not at an end, not at the head, simply at the table, which was where she had always belonged and which she was now occupying without the architecture of a plan beneath it. For a moment no one said anything. Then Renata said, "Eleanor." "Renata." She held her cup in both hands, a gesture I recognized, the same thing I do in the mornings, the same thing Thomas does, the thing that people do when they want the warmth of something held. "I want to say something," she said. "All right." She took a breath. And what happened then, what I watched happen in the specific quality of her face in that moment, was not something I had prepared for, because I had prepared for the managed version of Renata, the precise and efficient version, the version that frames things in the language of practicality, and what I got instead was something closer to the version underneath that version. "I have been telling myself a story," she said. She said it simply, without decoration. No preamble, no framing, no gentle cushioning of the statement to make it more comfortable for the person delivering it. "I have been telling myself that everything was about the future, about practicality, about what made sense. And some of it was true. I do worry about the future. I do think about practical things." She paused. "But I have also been thinking about this house, about what it is worth, about what it would mean if things were arranged differently." She looked at me. I think I convinced myself that those were the same thing. The worry and the wanting. I think I convinced myself so well that I stopped being able to see where one ended and the other began. I said nothing. "I heard you yesterday," she said. "Everything you said. And I've been thinking about it all night. And I want you to know that I'm not going to pretend that what you said wasn't right. Because it was." A silence. "What I said through your door was wrong," she said. "Not just wrong in the sense of being strategically wrong. Wrong in the basic sense. You heard it. You were standing in your own hallway, and you heard someone talking about your life, as though you weren't the person living it." She stopped. Thomas was very still beside her. "I don't have a simple fix for that," she said. "I don't think you want one. I think you want me to understand it, which is different." I looked at her. This was not the Renata I had been preparing to handle. This was not the managed, efficient, framing as concern version that I had catalogued over 3 years. This was something rawer and more honest than that, and I had not predicted it, which is the thing about people, even people you have been watching carefully, that will always catch you. They can surprise you. They can arrive at the edge of what they have been doing and look over it and not like what they see, and from that not liking they can choose something different. I did not yet know whether this was a sustainable choice or a morning after choice, the kind that feels true at 9 o'clock on a February Saturday and fades by the following week. I would not know that for some time. That was the honest answer. But I knew what it was in this moment. And in this moment it was real. "I hear you," I said. Renata nodded. She looked at her tea. "I don't know how to be in this house now," she said. I don't know what the rules are." "The rules," I said, "are the same as they have always been. This is my house. I am the person who lives here. I make the coffee before everyone else is awake on Saturday mornings, and my recipe tin stays on the counter, and I sit at this end of the table." I paused. "Those are the rules. They were always the rules. None of them prevent you from being welcome here." She looked up. "Are you saying I am?" she said. "Welcome." I looked at her. "You are my son's wife," I said. "You are the mother of my grandchildren. You are in this kitchen at 9 in the morning saying true things when it would have been easier not to." "Yes," I said. "You are welcome." She let out a breath. Thomas put his hand on her arm. Outside, James came down the stairs at a volume that suggested no awareness of the particular weight of the kitchen below him, which is exactly as it should be when you are 8 years old on a Saturday morning, and he came in and asked if there were pancakes, and the kitchen reassembled itself around that question the way kitchens do, with the particular resilience of spaces that have held a great many mornings. "There will be pancakes," I said. I stood up and went to the counter. I made pancakes. For emotional resolution, it is April now. The spring that Renata had planned as the end of one chapter has become instead the beginning of another one, and I have been sitting with that particular irony long enough to find it not bitter but almost funny, in the way that things which could have gone badly and did not sometimes reveal themselves as funny once enough time has passed. The house is mine. It was always mine. It will remain mine. Gillian Park sent me a note last month, handwritten on her good stationery, that said simply, "Everything in order." Raymond would approve. She is not a sentimental woman, but she knew Raymond, and she knew him well enough to know that approval was the highest compliment he gave. I put the note in my recipe tin, next to the memo from February, next to the folded index card where Raymond wrote his mother's brisket recipe in 1987, the one I have made at every holiday since. The commercial property on the edge of town is fully tenanted. The bakery recently put a new sign in the window, hand-painted with yellow letters, and Douglas Faraday told me they have started making a honey cake on Fridays that he considers the best thing currently available in this county. I drove by last Friday and looked at the sign. I did not go in, but I sat in the car for a moment and thought about Raymond buying that building from a man who thought he was getting a good deal. He was not. The lake property is still there, for hours north, at the end of a gravel road that Raymond and I used to drive every summer with the children in the back seat and the windows down. I have not been back since Raymond died. I am thinking about going this summer. I am thinking about taking Cora. And Renata are still here. The renovation at their own house, the renovation that began 3 years ago as a 6-week project and became something else entirely, has resumed, for reasons that are partly practical and partly, I think, about the particular human need to have something to build toward when you are also rebuilding something less visible. They are talking about completing it by autumn. I do not know what autumn will look like. I know what this spring looks like, and this spring looks like Sunday dinners at my table, at the right end of which I sit, and Renata passing dishes without the quality of management beneath the gesture, and Thomas talking about his work in the voice that is more himself than the translated version, and Cora doing her homework at the kitchen counter before dinner because she has decided she thinks better here than at her desk, which I believe and which also makes me happy in a way I do not try to quantify. Renata and I are not, to be precise, close. We are not there yet, and I am not certain we will arrive at close, and I have stopped needing us to. What we are is honest. Honest in the particular way of two people who have seen each other clearly in a specific moment and cannot unsee it, and who have chosen to remain in each other's lives anyway. That is its own kind of closeness. It does not feel like what I have with Thomas or what I have with Cora, or what I had with Raymond. It feels like what it is, something being built slowly between two women who understand each other better than either one entirely wanted to. Last week she asked me to teach her the chicken soup. Not because it was a gesture or a performance or a managed approach to something. She asked because James had a cold and she wanted to make the soup and she knew she did not know how. I showed her. We stood in the kitchen together, in my kitchen at my counter with a good pot, and I showed her how long it takes and why it takes that long and the particular moment when the color changes and you know the stock is ready. She paid attention in the way that precise people pay attention, the way Raymond paid attention to structural calculations, as though the information matters and she intends to keep it. She did not say thank you in the way that people say it when they mean something else. She said it once at the end and it sounded like the whole word. Undershawn turned 13 in March. We celebrated the way she wanted, which was a dinner with just the family, the 6 of us at the table with the lamb stew because she had asked for the lamb stew specifically, which means she is paying attention to the same things I am, which does not surprise me at all. At the end of dinner, she looked at me across the table, her grandfather's eyes in the candlelight, the particular clear gray of a sky deciding what it wants to do, and she said, "Grandma, can we go to the lake this summer?" I looked at her. "I've been thinking about that," I said. "Can we?" "Yes," I said. "We can." She smiled. It was a smile that had something of Raymond in it, the particular smile of a person who has been quietly waiting for a thing and is glad it has finally arrived. James immediately wanted to know if there were fish in the lake, and whether you could name them, and whether they would remember their names if you told them. The dinner became a discussion of fish memory and aquatic cognition that lasted 45 minutes and ended with James declaring that he intended to become a marine biologist as well as an astronomer, which he felt were compatible. Thomas said he thought they were. Renata said she thought the fish probably did not remember their names. I said Raymond used to talk to the doc. Everyone looked at me. He said it was good structural practice, I said. To tell something what you needed from it. A moment of silence. Then Thomas laughed. A real laugh, unmanaged and unperformative, the laugh of a man who has found his footing and is standing on it, and the laughter spread around the table the way warmth spreads in a room when someone opens a door they have been keeping closed, and the dinner ended in the particular untidy happiness of a family that has survived something and chosen, together and separately, to remain. I want to tell you about Douglas Faraday. In March, he brought me something over the back fence. A piece of paper folded carefully, which turned out to be a photograph. An old photograph, slightly faded, of this house and the adjacent properties as they had appeared in 1976, 8 years before Raymond and I bought it. The house is recognizable but younger looking. The trees are smaller, the garden is bare. The proportions are the same but without the particular character that 40 years of habitation gives a structure. Found it in a box, Douglas said. Thought you might want it. I looked at it for a long time. Do you know who lived here then? I asked. A family called the Praters. 3 kids. They moved away, I can't remember where. Raymond used to know the story better than I did. Raymond had known a great many stories about this house that I was still in the process of learning, in the way that you learn the full depth of a person only gradually, and sometimes only after they are gone, in the things they leave behind and the people who knew them and the structures they built that continue to stand. I put the photograph on my nightstand beside the photograph of Raymond and me at the lake in 1989. The 2 photographs together, the house at its beginning, the people who made it theirs, seemed right in a way I did not try to explain. Thank you, Douglas, I said. Raymond would have liked knowing you were still here, he said. Not as comfort, not as sentiment, as simple information, offered by a man who has been 2 houses down for 16 years and who has been paying attention. Yes, I said. He would have. Understand, there is something I have not told you yet, something I have been holding until there was enough of the story told around it to give it the weight it carries. On the Sunday after the February conversation, the Sunday 2 days after the kitchen table, when the house was still recalibrating around what had been said, Cora came to my room in the morning before anyone else was awake. She knocked twice and I said come in, and she came in carrying something that she placed on my bed in front of me without saying anything first. It was my recipe tin. Not the recipe tin from the counter. That one was where I had placed it the morning of the conversation and where it had remained. This was a different tin. Smaller, older, with a faded floral pattern on the lid that I had not seen in 30 years. My mother's recipe tin. The one I had given Cora 2 years ago, quietly and without ceremony, because I wanted her to have it before the world had a chance to make that decision for me. I had forgotten I had given it to her. I kept it in my room, Cora said. In case. I looked at her. In case of what? I asked. She shrugged, with the particular eloquence of a 13-year-old shrug that contains more information than most paragraphs. In case someone tried to take your other one. At least you'd still have this one. I looked at my granddaughter, at the tin in my lap, at my mother's recipe tin with its faded flowers, at the girl who had been carrying it in her room in case because she understood, with the clear-eyed attention of someone who notices things, that the recipe tin on the counter was not just a tin. It was the same understanding Raymond had when he built this house, when he structured the accounts, when he said this house will outlast every complication. When he looked at a building on the edge of town and saw not what it was but what it could become. Some people see that way. Some people are simply built for the long view. Cora's built for the long view. She did not get it from me alone. I took the tin from my lap and held it for a moment. My mother's tin, my grandmother's recipe for pastry that I can still make from memory, the handwritten card for Raymond's mother's brisket that had been in my tin and was now duplicated in hers. You didn't need to do this, I said. I know, she said. I wanted to. I set the tin on my nightstand, next to the photographs. Come here, I said. She came and sat beside me, and I put my arm around her, and she leaned against me the way she has since she was 3 years old, with the complete relaxation of a person who knows they are exactly where they belong, and we sat together in the early morning of the Sunday after the kitchen table, and outside the February light was coming up over Raymond's garden, cold and honest and endlessly patient. I have been thinking in the weeks since about what this whole period of time, from October to February, from the hallway to the kitchen table, has been about. It would be easy to say it was about the house. The house was the visible thing, the thing with a legal description and a market value and a set of documents now lodged in Gillian Park's files. The house was what the real estate agents had been brought to assess, what the spring timeline had been aimed at, what the brochures for the senior community with gorgeous grounds were in service of. But I do not think the house was actually what any of it was about. Not for me. What it was about, what I was protecting from October all the way through to April, was simpler and also less reducible to a document. It was Sunday dinners. It was Saturday mornings with the coffee before anyone else is awake. It was chicken soup on Wednesdays, and the particular smell of it filling the house. It was the recipe tin on the counter, in the spot where it has always been, in the spot where my mother kept hers, in the spot that means something that cannot be transferred or assessed or managed into a timeline. It was James at the counter asking about fish memory. It was Cora with her history books and her grandfather's eyes, keeping watch in the armchair. It was Thomas in the adjacent chair, with his actual face visible again. It was even Renata standing at the counter learning how long the soup takes, paying attention in the way that precise people pay attention. All of it, lives in a house on Birchwood Lane that Raymond built for listening, at a table where the right end is mine, in a kitchen where the recipe tin is on the counter because I put it there and I will continue to put it there. Not because I won something, because this is where I live. This is where Raymond and I made 40 years and where I have made 9 years since and where I intend to make more. Not because I am afraid of other places but because this specific place holds a specific weight that cannot be replicated, and I am old enough and clear-eyed enough and yes, stubborn enough to know the difference between what can be let go and what cannot. What cannot be let go is this. This house. This kitchen. This end of the table. This is the invisible thing that no document can fully protect and that no plan, however elegant, can fully secure. The only thing that secures it is staying. Staying and making the coffee and putting the recipe tin on the counter, and sitting at the right end of the table until the people in the house understand, as they eventually always do if you are patient enough and clear enough and unafraid enough, that you are not a variable in their story. You are the story. The house, the family, the Sunday dinners, the grandchildren who will carry your mother's recipe tin. All of it proceeds from you. It has always proceeded from you. The woman they tried to plan away was the one holding everything together. She always had been. She is still here. It is a Saturday morning in April. I am at the right end of the table. I have the coffee. Cora will come down first, in the Blue Star pajamas, and sit beside me and drink her milky coffee that Renata partially disapproves of but no longer actively discourages. Thomas will come next, in the adjacent chair, and he will talk about something ordinary, something from the week, something about his work or something Cora said or something James is planning to build for the solar system project that has now expanded to include an auditory component, apparently. Renata will come last, and she will make her tea, and she will sit across, and the kitchen will be what it is, imperfect, recovering, a work in progress, a family that had a difficult year and is learning to be honest with itself, which is one of the hardest and most necessary things a family can do. James will arrive like weather, sudden, loud, completely unaware that any of this happened, which is one of the great mercies of being 8, and will want to know if we can have French toast, and there will be a discussion about what constitutes an appropriate Saturday breakfast that will go on longer than necessary and that I will enjoy with my whole heart. Douglas will walk his dog past the back fence, and I will wave from the kitchen window and he will wave back. The recipe tin is on the counter. The photographs are on my nightstand. The lake is 4 hours north at the end of a gravel road, waiting for Cora and me in the summer. Raymond built this house for listening and it is listening still, and I am in it and I intend to stay. She goes to a home by spring. It is spring. I am home. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it, and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated, and we tell those stories here.